My name is Helena Moore, and I am 66 years old. I should have spent these years in quiet comfort, with warm tea on the porch and Victor's steady presence beside me. Instead, I found myself standing at his grave on a raw, wind-swept afternoon. My black dress clinging to my body like morning itself had wrapped me in its grip. The funeral was painfully small. Too small for a man like Victor, who had spent his life fixing neighbors' bicycles, mending locks, and lending out his tools without ever asking for anything in return. Only a handful of faces had gathered by the open grave, my sons Adrian and Lucas. Adrian's wife Sabrina, my old friend Doris, and the pastor. Their silhouettes were stiff against the gray sky, their voices hushed, their sympathy cold and perfunctory. I clutched a damp handkerchief in one hand, tears clouding my sight as the pastor spoke of eternal peace, of dignity and rest. But the words slid over me like water on stone. I didn't want rest. I didn't want peace. I wanted Victor alive, standing next to me, squeezing my trembling fingers like he had done for 42 years. When my turn came, Doris supported me as I dropped the first handful of dirt onto the polished wood of the casket. The sound echoed in my chest like a cruel drumbeat. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. And then my phone buzzed inside my purse. The vibration felt obscene in that solemn silence, yet it was insistent, demanding. My hands shook as I fumbled the device out. The screen glowed, and the words seared themselves into me. I am still alive. That's not me in the casket. My breath caught. For a moment the world tilted. I thought I might collapse into the grave myself. Surely this was some cruel prank, some monster mocking my grief. But the words didn't change. They stayed sharp, clear, undeniable. My chest tightened. My first instinct was to dismiss it, but a deeper, darker instinct whispered, "What if it's true?" I forced my trembling fingers to type a reply. "Who are you?" The answer came instantly, as though the sender had been waiting. "I can't say. They're watching." "Don't trust Adrian or Lucas." My throat constricted, slowly. I lifted my gaze from the screen. My sons stood a few feet away, side by side near the casket, Adrian in his sharp black suit, every hair in place, his expression composed yet strangely rehearsed. Lucas fidgeted restlessly, his eyes darting around, eager for the ritual to end. They looked like mourners. But now, under the weight of that message, their faces blurred. Their grief seemed false. For the first time, I felt something I had never associated with my children: fear. "Mom, are you all right?" Adrian asked. Stepping closer, his hand brushed my shoulder, a practiced gesture of comfort. His smile was faint, sympathetic, but my stomach turned with suspicion. "I'm fine," I whispered, slipping the phone back into my purse before he could see. My voice cracked like brittle glass as the prayers ended and the casket sank into the ground. The words replayed in my head like a curse: "I am still alive. Don't trust Adrian or Lucas." By the time I left the cemetery, my grief had fused with something darker: doubt. If Victor truly lived, who was buried in that box? And if he was gone, why would someone accuse my sons of betrayal that night, in the silence of my empty house? I sat clutching my phone. My heart no longer knew whether it was breaking from loss or pounding in fear. The funeral had buried more than my husband. It had buried the certainty of my world. That night, after the funeral, sleep was impossible. The house seemed to echo with absence. Victor's coffee mug still sat on the kitchen table. His jacket hung neatly by the door. His armchair sagged slightly where his body had molded it through the years. The silence pressed down like a stone. But heavier still were the words from that message: "I am still alive. Don't trust Adrian or Lucas." I sat by the window and, clutching my phone, staring out into the darkness. And as grief twisted inside me, my mind drifted backward, back to the beginning, to a time when life felt full of hope and simplicity. I was 24 when Victor first truly saw me. Riverbend was a small town where everyone knew one another, where gossip traveled faster than the wind across the river. I worked as a seamstress, patching clothes for neighbors while caring for my ailing mother. My dresses were plain, my shoes worn, but I carried a stubborn pride in every stitch. Victor owned the bicycle repair shop his father had left him. He wasn't wealthy, not by any measure, but he had something more valuable: steady hands and a heart that never turned away from someone in need. I remember that morning clearly. He had grease stains on his palms, the sun glinting in his hair as he stepped outside his shop. "Good morning, Helena," he said with that shy, warm smile. "Need me to check your bike? I didn't even own a bicycle." But I nodded anyway. It was a small lie, one that gave me an excuse to linger. That lie grew into laughter under the oak tree in the town square, then promises whispered beneath the stars, and eventually vows spoken at a modest wedding with nothing but hope to our name. Our first years together were hard. We lived in a 2-room house with a roof that leaked when it rained. We set out pots and pans across the floor to catch the water, laughing at the absurdity of it even as we shivered through stormy nights. Victor worked from dawn until dusk in the shop. I sewed clothes by lamplight. We were poor, but our hands always reached for one another in the dark. When Adrian was born, I thought my heart would burst from joy. He had Victor's dark eyes and my smile. 2 years later came Lucas, smaller, quieter, but with a grip on my finger that felt like a vow never to let go. Victor adored his boys. On Sundays, he took them fishing at the river, and every night he told them bedtime stories, his voice weaving warmth into the thin walls of our home. For a long time, I believed we were the luckiest family alive, but even then, small cracks had begun to form. I remember Adrian at 10 years old, frowning at our old car that coughed smoke with every start. Why don't we have a new one? Why do we live in this falling apart house? His eyes lingered on the peeling paint, sharper than a child's should be. Victor brushed it off with laughter, but I saw the shadow in his eyes. He knew as I did that a child's love could bend under the weight of ambition. And though I couldn't name it then, that was the moment the first fracture appeared in the foundation of our family. Looking back now, I realized those small cracks were only the beginning. What started as questions about money and possessions slowly deepened into something colder, harder, a distance I could no longer bridge with a mother's love. When Adrian turned 18, Victor offered him a place in the repair shop. It was the same opportunity Victor's own father had once given him, a chance to learn a trade, to build an honest life with his own 2 hands. But Adrian only laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "I'm not going to waste my life fixing bikes," he said. I'm going to be someone important." I saw the way Victor's shoulders stiffened at those words. He didn't argue. But later that night, he sat on the porch staring at the stars, his silence heavier than any anger. I tried to comfort him, but his disappointment was a wound that no embrace could mend. Lucas, ever the shadow of his older brother, followed Adrian's lead. If Adrian mocked our simple life, Lucas joined in with a chuckle, even when I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. He was a boy torn between loyalty to his brother and the values we had tried so hard to teach him. By their 20s, the gap between us had become a canyon. Adrian moved to the city, joining a real estate firm. He returned to Riverbend less and less, always dressed in fine suits, always impatient to leave. Lucas, too, drifted after him, dabbling in business ventures he barely understood. Our family dinners turned into fleeting visits, rushed conversations, empty smiles. And then came Sabrina. Adrian brought her home one spring evening, her red dress striking against the faded paint of our porch. Her heels sank into the dirt. Her perfume clashed with the smell of sawdust and oil that clung to our home. She shook my hand with a touch so light it was nearly an insult, her eyes sweeping over the sagging roof and peeling walls. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Moore," she said, her smile tight, her voice smooth as glass. At dinner, I laid out our best meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, bread fresh from the oven. Sabrina barely touched her plate. She nudged the food around with her fork, her lips pursed in polite disdain. Later, I overheard Adrian whisper to her, "Next time we'll take them to a restaurant, somewhere nicer." Those words pierced me more deeply than he could have known. Our table, our food, our effort, all dismissed as inadequate. Lucas, meanwhile, visited less and less. Always distracted, always on his phone. "Just a quick stop, Mom," he'd say. "I've got a meeting." He followed Adrian into investments and schemes I didn't understand, chasing money as though love and family could no longer fill him. Holidays that once brimmed with laughter and candlelight turned stiff, uncomfortable. They brought gifts we didn't need: luxury appliances, expensive trinkets, tokens meant to show their success rather than their love. They stayed for only a few hours, then disappeared back to their city lives. One evening, Adrian arrived with Sabrina at his side, papers in hand. His smile was polished, professional, almost predatory. "Mom, Dad," he began. "This house is falling apart. It's worth almost nothing. You should sell it and move into a retirement community. Sabrina and I have already found some great options." The word community stuck in my throat like poison. This was not just a house. It was the place where Victor and I had built our lives, where we had raised our children, where every corner held a memory. Victor's voice was steady but unyielding. "This is our home. We're not leaving." For a moment, Adrian's mask slipped. His eyes hardened, his jaw clenched, and he exchanged a glance with Lucas. In that silent look, I saw calculation, not care, and for the first time, I wondered if my sons were no longer my sons at all but strangers wearing their faces. Victor's refusal that night carved an invisible line through our family. From then on, Adrian and Lucas stopped trying to hide their frustration. Their visits became colder, their conversations clipped, as if every word exchanged with us was a transaction. Even the air around them seemed different, calculated, distant, foreign. And then came the Tuesday morning that shattered my world. Victor left early for the shop, as he always did. He kissed my forehead, his lips warm and familiar, and promised to be home for lunch. I had already decided to make his favorite meatloaf with mashed potatoes. I remember humming to myself as I peeled the potatoes, the kettle whistling in the background. Then the phone rang. Its shrill tone made my heart leap before I even answered. "Mrs. Moore," a voice said, clipped and urgent. "This is Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The room spun. My knees buckled, and I clutched the counter for support. "Is he alive? Please tell me he's alive. Please come quickly." The voice repeated, evasive. My neighbor Doris drove me because my hands shook too violently to hold the wheel. The 30 minutes to the hospital stretched into eternity. I kept replaying Victor's smile that morning, the casual wave as he left. He was careful, steady, not the kind of man to be careless with machines. When I arrived, Adrian and Lucas were already there. My heart stuttered. How had they known so quickly the hospital had called me? Not them. "Mom," Adrian said, embracing me too tightly. It was terrible. A machine exploded in the shop. Dad's badly burned. Head trauma too. The doctors. They don't think he'll make it. Lucas stood beside him. His eyes red, but his expression unsettled me. He looked nervous. Not shattered. Like a man waiting for news of a business deal rather than his father's fate. They allowed me into the ICU for only a few minutes. When I saw Victor, my breath caught in my throat. Tubes and wires tangled around his body, machines beeping in relentless rhythm. His face was swathed in bandages, barely recognizable. But his hand, his dear hand, was free. I clutched it and whispered through my tears, "Victor, I'm here. Please fight. Please stay." And then, faintly, impossibly, his fingers squeezed mine. It was the smallest movement. But I knew. It was not reflex, it was him, fighting to reach me, trying to tell me something. The doctors dismissed it as nothing. Adrian said gently, "Mom, you have to prepare yourself. Dad wouldn't want to suffer." The word suffer hung in the sterile air like a verdict. For 3 days, I barely left Victor's side. Adrian and Lucas rotated shifts, but instead of holding their father's hand, they whispered with doctors, asking about insurance policies and costs. Their voices were low, urgent, always circling back to money. On the 3rd day, the doctor gathered us. "Mrs. Moore, your husband's condition is critical. The burns are infected, the brain injury severe. Realistically, there's almost no chance of recovery." "No," I cried. "We'll try everything, whatever it takes." But Adrian placed his hand on mine. "Mom, Dad always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden." The word sliced through me like a blade. 2 nights later, at 4:37 a.m., the machines shrieked, and nurses rushed in. I was shoved aside as they worked for 40 minutes. And then, silence. Victor was gone. I collapsed against his still hand, begging him to come back, my tears soaking the bandages. But my sons arrived an hour later, not with grief, but with funeral brochures. "Mom," Adrian said firmly, "we've arranged everything. A simple casket, a short service. It's what Dad would have wanted, but I knew better. My Victor had deserved so much more than a rushed goodbye. and deep inside me, a seed of doubt sprouted into something darker. Something was terribly wrong. The funeral passed like a fog. I wore the same black dress I had worn at my mother's burial years ago, but this time it felt heavier, as though it carried every sorrow I had ever known. The gray sky hung low. The wind bit at my skin, and only a handful of mourners stood around me. I thought nothing could wound me further until my purse buzzed again. The same number, the same cold urgency. Check the papers. Look at the insurance. Watch the bank withdrawals. I shoved the phone back before Adrian could notice, my hands trembling. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp, assessing, but I forced my face into stillness. That night, unable to silence the echo of those words, I unlocked Victor's old desk. The drawer creaked open, revealing the metal box where he kept important documents, tax forms, deeds, insurance policies. My heart stuttered as I flipped through the papers. For decades, Victor had carried only a modest life insurance policy, $5,000, enough to cover expenses if tragedy struck. But now, just 6 months earlier, the policy had been changed. $100,000. 10 times the amount. I sank into the chair, cold sweeping through me. Why hadn't he told me? Victor told me everything. Unless he hadn't chosen this at all. Beneath the policy was another paper stranger still. A workplace accident insurance. Purchased barely 2 months ago. After 40 years in that shop. Why would Victor suddenly fear an accident? My stomach twisted. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. The next morning, I went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, who had known us for decades, greeted me with soft pity. "Helena, I'm so sorry. Victor was a good man." "Thank you," I whispered, forcing strength into my voice. "I need to review our accounts." When she slid the statements across, my eyes blurred. In the last 3 months, large withdrawals, 1,000 here, 3,000 there, 4,000 more. Sums we could never afford to spare. "Who authorized these?" I asked, my throat dry. "Your husband," she said gently. "He came in with Adrian once or twice. Said Victor had trouble reading the fine print without his glasses. But Victor had never struggled with his glasses. And when I studied the signatures, my blood ran cold. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, not the steady hand I had known for 42 years. I left the bank dizzy, barely able to breathe. That afternoon, I forced myself to step into Victor's workshop. Adrian had said a machine exploded, that the place was ruined. But when I opened the door, I froze. Everything was immaculate now. Tools aligned on their hooks, machines polished, intact. No scorch marks, no twisted metal, no signs of fire or explosion. On the desk, a scrap of paper lay beneath a wrench. Victor's handwriting, hurried. "Jagged Adrian insists I raise the insurance. Says it's for Helena. But I don't trust his intentions." My knees buckled. Another note was tucked beneath it. "Lucas brought papers for the shop. Claimed it was modernization. Why so urgent?" Tears blurred my sight as I pressed the notes to my chest. Victor had known. He had tried to warn me. And then my phone buzzed again. "You're on the right path. Don't stop. The truth is darker than you think." I stood in the middle of Victor's spotless shop, clutching his last words, my grief hardening into resolve. Victor hadn't died by accident. He had been hunted, and the hunters were my own sons. That night, I spread Victor's notes across the kitchen table, the ink blurring in my tear-stained vision. His words, his suspicion cut through me like shards of glass. For decades, we had built a life on trust, on honesty. And yet, even as he faced death, he had not trusted our own sons. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house sounded like a warning. Every rustle of wind outside like someone watching. I sat in silence until dawn, the notes clenched in my hands, my phone lying beside me like a snake waiting to strike. At noon, another message came. "My name is Daniel Carter. I'm a private investigator. Victor hired me 3 weeks before his death. Meet me tomorrow. Cafe on River Street. Sit in the back." My pulse thundered. Victor had known something was wrong enough to hire a detective. If he had lived long enough to trust Daniel, then perhaps the truth had been closer than I ever dared believe. The next afternoon, I arrived at the cafe early. The place smelled of coffee and baked bread, but my stomach churned too violently to feel hunger. I sat at the farthest table, my hands clasped tightly together, my heart pounding. At exactly 3, a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes entered, carrying a brown folder under his arm. He spotted me, approached, and lowered his voice. Mrs. Moore, I'm Daniel Carter. I'm sorry for your loss. Victor he was a good man. I swallowed, unable to speak. He slid into the seat across from me and set the folder on the table. Victor came to me because he feared your sons were planning something. He didn't want to frighten you, but he needed answers. My hands trembled as he clicked open a small recorder. Then, my husband's voice filled the cafe. Daniel, if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Adrian keeps pressing me to raise the insurance. Lucas is bringing me contracts I don't understand. I feel trapped in my own home. Please, if I don't make it, protect Helena. My chest broke open. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I gripped the edge of the table. Daniel pressed play again. This time, a different voice. Cold, sharp, unmistakable. Adrian, no, we can't wait any longer. The old man suspects. Sabrina's right, we use methanol. It'll look like a stroke. Mom will be too blinded by grief to question anything. I gasped, covering my mouth, nearly choking on my own sob. And then Lucas's voice. Hesitant, but complicit. Everything's ready. Adrian says just mix it with Dad's vitamins. He won't notice. The symptoms will come slow confusion, dizziness. By the time it's obvious, it'll be too late. The cafe seemed to spin around me. My sons, my own flesh and blood. The boys I had rocked to sleep. The children whose scraped knees I had kissed. Whose laughter had once filled my life. Now their voices were plotting their father's murder. Daniel's voice anchored me. There's more. Photos. Evidence. He slid across grainy images, Adrian leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hand. Lucas standing outside a pharmacy, looking over his shoulder. And finally, Sabrina, her manicured hand passing a folded envelope to Adrian, her lips curved in a calculating smile. Daniel's tone dropped lower. Victor wasn't wrong to distrust her. Sabrina has a history. A boyfriend. Years ago. Died suddenly. Insurance payout. She was never charged, but the whispers followed her. I stared at the photos, at the cruel certainty they held. Victor hadn't simply been betrayed. He had been hunted by his own children, and Sabrina had sharpened their knives. Daniel's final words pierced me deeper than any knife. There's one more recording. Lucas again. The tape hissed before his nervous voice filled the air. After Dad. We'll handle Mom. Adrian says it'll look like she couldn't live without him. A suicide. Then everything is ours. I pressed both hands to my mouth, but the scream inside me had nowhere to go. They hadn't just killed their father. They had planned to kill me too. After leaving the cafe, Daniel's words echoed inside me like a relentless drumbeat. They're coming for you next. That night, I sat in Victor's empty armchair, staring into the shadows. Fear coiled around me, but beneath it, a fire had begun to burn. For weeks I had been stumbling through grief, blind and helpless, but now I had proof. I was no longer just a widow drowning in sorrow. I was a woman preparing to fight for my husband, for the truth, for myself. The next morning, the phone rang. Adrian's voice slid through the line, soft and syrupy. Mom, we're coming over this afternoon. Sabrina baked your favorite pastries. We'll bring coffee too. We want to spend time with you. My skin prickled. His voice was too sweet, too rehearsed, exactly as Daniel had warned. They'll try today, Daniel said grimly when I called him. The police are ready. Don't eat. Don't drink anything. Let them make their move. We'll be there. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. This time, I'll be ready. The knock came at 3. I opened the door to find them standing on my porch, Adrian with a glossy white box tied in ribbon, Sabrina with a thermos gleaming in her manicured hands, Lucas trailing behind with a stiff smile. Mom, Adrian said warmly, we've missed you. We brought your favorite lemon pastries, Sabrina added, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold, and fresh coffee, just the way you like it. The scent of sugar and citrus wafted through the air, but all I smelled was poison. Thank you, I said evenly, stepping aside. Let's sit in the kitchen. We gathered around the wooden table where countless meals had once been shared, but the warmth of memory was gone, replaced by the suffocating tension of a stage set for murder. Adrian poured steaming coffee into my cup, watching me closely. Here, Mom. Drink while it's hot. I let my hand hover above the cup, then slowly pushed it away. I've already had coffee today. For a moment, irritation flashed in Adrian's eyes before he masked it with a smile. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, while Sabrina's lips curved into a faint, calculating smirk. Mom, Lucas said, his tone firmer now. You can't keep living alone like this. Adrian and I talked to some doctors. They think you need care, a place where you'll be safe. Safe. The word dripped with venom. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. Safe. Like your father was with his coffee laced with methanol with an accident that never happened. Their faces froze. Sabrina's smirk faltered. Lucas paled, and Adrian's mask slipped entirely. You've lost your mind. Adrian snapped. You're paranoid. No one will believe you. That's where you're wrong, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I know everything. The insurance, the debts, the poison. I've heard the recordings. Victor warned me. You murdered your father. And now you want me gone, too. The kitchen fell into dead silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time we finish what we started. He pushed the coffee cup closer, his hand trembling with fury. Before I could respond, heavy footsteps pounded on the porch. The door burst open, and Sergeant Collins stormed in with 2 officers. Daniel close behind, Adrian Moore, Lucas Moore, Sabrina Allen. The sergeant barked. You are under arrest for the murder of Victor Moore and conspiracy to murder Helena Moore. Chaos erupted. Lucas bolted toward the door, only to be tackled by an officer. Sabrina screamed, the thermos crashing to the floor and spilling coffee across the tiles. Adrian stood rigid, his face drained of color, as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. This is insane, he shouted. You can't prove anything. Daniel stepped forward, lifting the folder from his arm. We have your voices on tape, your financial records, photographs, and witnesses. It's over. For the first time, I saw fear flash in Adrian's eyes, not fear of me, but of justice. As they were dragged from the kitchen, Sabrina turned her head, her gaze locking on me, her lips curved into a thin, defiant smile, as if to say this isn't finished. My knees weakened, but Daniel's steady hand anchored me. It's done, he said softly. I looked at the shattered pastries on the floor, at the cooling coffee meant to end my life, and whispered, No, it's just beginning. Now the world will know the truth. The morning after the arrests, Riverbend was buzzing with whispers. Neighbors who had once waved warmly from their porches now stared in disbelief. Some shook their heads, murmuring that Adrian and Lucas must have been framed. Others avoided my eyes, as if betrayal itself might spread like a disease. A few came to my door, offering quiet condolences, but none of it mattered. The truth was out. My sons were not victims. They were predators. And Sabrina, the serpent who had slithered into our family, had sharpened their hunger. The trial began 2 months later at the county courthouse. By then, the story had spread beyond Riverbend. Reporters filled the pews, notebooks in hand, cameras flashing. The headlines read like nightmares: sons on trial for father's murder, daughter-in-law as accomplice. I sat in the front row every day, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Daniel steady at my side. His presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone, though in truth, I had never felt lonelier in my life. When Adrian, Lucas, and Sabrina were led into the courtroom in chains, my breath caught. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little boys they had once been, Adrian with a mischievous grin, Lucas clutching his brother's hand as they ran to the river with fishing poles. But those children were gone. In their place stood men carved by greed, their faces hard, their eyes hollow, and Sabrina, her beauty sharpened into cruelty, her gaze unrepentant. The prosecutor wasted no time. One by one, the recordings played. First, Victor's weary voice. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Then Adrian's cold tone. Sabrina's right, we use methanol. It'll look like a stroke. Mom will be too blinded by grief to question anything. And finally, Lucas's damning words. After Dad. We'll handle Mom too. Make it look like a suicide. Then everything is ours. The courtroom was silent except for gasps. Even the reporters paused in their scribbling. The defense tried to twist the story. They argued desperation debts, pressure, Sabrina's influence. They painted Adrian and Lucas as victims of manipulation. They painted Sabrina as a misunderstood woman, merely following her husband's wishes. But the evidence was a tidal wave. Photographs of Adrian buying poison, bank records showing forged withdrawals, insurance policies signed under duress, the autopsy revealing lethal levels of methanol in Victor's system. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself before the jury until no doubt remained. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled as I walked to the stand. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. Mrs. Moore, how would you describe your relationship with your family before your husband's death? I swallowed hard, my throat raw. I loved them. I raised those boys with everything I had. Victor gave his whole life to them. We sacrificed so much so they could have more, and they repaid that love with murder. They took their father from me. They tried to take my life too. My voice broke, but I did not cry. Instead, I turned to Adrian and Lucas. For a fleeting second, Adrian lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. But it was too late, far too late. Sabrina, meanwhile, only smirked, as though the trial itself was beneath her. After 3 grueling days, the jury deliberated, hours stretched into eternity. Finally, the foreman stood, his hands shaking as he read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Adrian Moore, Lucas Moore, and Sabrina Allen, on the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. The word rang through the room like a bell. My breath escaped in a sob of relief and sorrow combined. The judge's voice followed, solemn and final. Adrian Moore and Lucas Moore. For the murder of Victor Moore and conspiracy to murder Helena Moore, this court sentences you to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 30 years. Sabrina Allen, for instigation, conspiracy, and direct participation in the crime. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. Sabrina's smirk faltered at last. Her eyes, once smug, now burned with fury as the bailiff led her away. Adrian looked hollow, broken. Lucas wept openly, whispering apologies I could no longer hear. I sat frozen, my hands trembling in my lap. Justice had been done, but at what cost? I had won the truth, but lost my family. Months later, when the noise of the trial faded, I transformed Victor's old workshop into a garden. Roses, sunflowers, and carnations bloomed where sawdust once gathered. Every Sunday, I carried fresh flowers to his grave. On the headstone, I had engraved Victor Moore, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. Sometimes, kneeling at the stone, I whispered, "We did it, my love. They will never hurt us again." And when the breeze stirred the petals, I imagined it was Victor's spirit answering, proud of me for finding the strength he had trusted me to carry. One afternoon, as I left the cemetery, a reporter stopped me. "Mrs. Moore, do you forgive them?" I stood in silence, the question hanging heavy in the air. Forgive, my heart ached with a pain words could not ease. I turned away without answering, tears blurring my vision, because forgiveness was not mine to give, only Victor's, and he was gone.